Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to Tess Gerritsen. With over 40 million copies sold, New York Times bestselling thriller writer Tess Gerritsen is widely known for her Rizzoli Isles novels, which inspired the hit TNT television series that aired for 7 seasons. The iconic crime-stopping duo Jane Rizzoli and Maura Isles return in Tess's latest novel, Listen to Me, which will be available on July 5th. Tess, welcome to Uncorking a Story.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
Well, I always like to ask my authors the same question to start off, which is, Tess, where does your story as an author begin?
Age 7. I was, I was like a lot of writers. I was a big reader as a child, and I was into Nancy Drew and all those mystery stories for young kids. And I think I was about 7 when I told my dad I was going to be a writer.
And what was his reactions to that revelation?
That's no way to make a living. That was his reaction. So I wrote my first book at age 7. It was a biography of my cat who had just died. I bound it together with needle and thread. And after that, that's what I wanted to do. I did have something of a detour, though, because I was listening to my dad, and he said, find something you can support yourself with. So I went to medical school and I became a doctor instead for a while, but I always knew I was a writer.
Before we jump into your career in medicine, what was the cat's name?
Oh, the cat's name was Katie.
Katie. And did you take any artistic license in the biography of your cat? Did you embellish anything on her life?
Well, in my story, she was a lot more courageous than she was in real life.
So not scared of a dog or some other kind of thing.
No, the Katie of my fiction was, that's the thing about fiction. These characters in your fiction are like superhuman versions of people we actually know.
Right.
They're people we know, but more interesting and more courageous and just I suppose worthy of having a story told about them. Yeah.
Well, so you go to med school, and you listen to your father, who says, "Hey, find a way to support yourself," and then you say, "Well, I'll go to medical school." I mean, there's many other ways to support yourself. So, what was it about medicine that drew you into that as a career?
Well, I was always interested in biology. I mean, as a kid, I was, I would hunt for wild animals in the little canyon I lived next to in San Diego, and I'd come home with buckets of lizards. I had a mouse, a pet mouse, and when the mouse died, I didn't bury it. I actually cut it open to see what its organs looked like. So I think I was on that path to medicine anyway. But the writing bug is a pretty hard thing to shake.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a good thing that the mouse died before you autopsied it, because if the reverse were true, you might have become a serial killer.
I'd be in prison right now.
Yeah. So career in medicine, and not unlike another author who I love to read. I mean, I love to read your stuff, but Robin Cook was one of my early when I was a kid. My grandfather was a doctor. He was he's actually a surgeon in World War II. And after he retired, I only met him after he retired because, big age difference there. But he had all these Robin Cook books in his library, and I would just start reading them. Mm-hmm. And I would like, that is just, I was fascinated by the medical thriller. And I'm curious, when did you pick up writing again after sort of the career in medicine? How did just kind of bridge me to your career as a writer?
Well, I was writing all the way through medical school and residency, but they weren't book-length things. They were short stories. They were short articles. And I was occasionally getting published. But these were just short stories. And it wasn't until I went on maternity leave with my first son that I had this block of time at home. I had a baby who loved to sleep. I mean, he would take these 3-hour naps. So that's when I would write. So yeah, my very first novel was on maternity leave. It was a romantic suspense novel. And I think that maybe after the second child came, I decided to write more in earnest. So I was working part-time as a doctor, also being a mom, but also whenever I had a chance, I would write another page.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the latest book, Listen to Me. So I know Rizzoli Isles are back in this one. Did you think you'd ever write another Rizzoli Isles book?
I didn't know. The last one I wrote was I Know a Secret. It was book number 12. And then I wanted to do something else. And that's the thing about writers. Sometimes we have all these various projects. They don't always fit in one box, and we want to do them. And I kind of feel like I'm getting older, and I realize that if I don't write these books now, I'll never write them. So let's just have fun and do something different. So I wrote a ghost story, which was The Shape of Night. I wrote a book in conjunction with author Gary Braver, which was called Choose Me. And then the idea came to me for Listen to Me, and it really had to do with Jane's mother, Angela. I haven't really told her story yet. She's been in the series from the very beginning, and she's a middle-aged mom. Well, she's in her close to 60 now, I think, in this particular story. And it occurs to me as I get older, people stop listening to us. Everybody listens to the pretty woman, the young woman. Everybody pays attention to her, but what about these older women who have all this wisdom, who have this experience, and maybe are pretty clever at seeing things? I also thought, well, where does Jane Rizzoli get her smarts? It wasn't from her dad. It was from her mother. So I thought it was time for a story that would focus on Jane's mom, Angela.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So, but I'm curious, when you pivoted away from writing the series, what was the fan reaction to that? I mean, were they disappointed? Because I know that, certain authors, have a hard time getting away from. It's a blessing and a curse to have a series that's popular, right? It's a blessing. It's an annuity. I mean, you've got a built-in fan base. It's a curse because when you try to make a change and say, hey, I can do something different, the reaction isn't always positive. I'm curious as to how your fans took it.
Well, that's why Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes the first time. It is. We get tired of writing about the same people. Again, we want to spread our wings. So you're absolutely correct. Fans don't know what to do with it. They're shocked, number one, they're disappointed, number two, and they don't necessarily understand what you're doing. So when I wrote The Shape of Night, which was completely different, it's an erotic ghost story and a murder mystery. People thought, what the heck is she doing? It's also interesting to me that thriller readers, mystery readers, don't go into romance very well. There's this divide. I think romance readers are willing to read across the board with all sorts of different genres, but mystery readers have a thing about romance that it's almost beneath them. So I think that was one of the things that threw them, is like, oh, she's writing about a romance between a woman and a ghost. Where is this going? But I love that story, and I love ghost stories. I love Gothic novels, and it was based on a little bit about the haunted houses of Maine. I live in Maine. We have reportedly we are reportedly one of the most haunted places in the country, if you believe in ghosts. And I thought it was time to maybe address that part of my childhood, which was a fascination with ghosts.
Yeah. I mean, probably no coincidence then that Stephen King lives in Maine.
Yeah, we have really scary writers up here, but it's the least scary state in the country.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. So interesting, talking about writing that sort of erotic kind of ghost story. To me, that's a fascinating it's a fascinating pivot. How did you find writing in sort of a newer genre like that? Not that you haven't written obviously thrillers before, but sort of the physical angle might be a little bit different. How did you find kind of writing that, and how well were you accepted as a writer of that type of story?
Well, I started off writing romantic suspense, so it wasn't
Right.
that big of a leap for me to go back to romance. I think the hard part for me, and it's always difficult, even for romance authors, is how do you write about eroticism? How do you write a love scene without feeling like you don't want your mom to look at this, or you're kind of embarrassed about your neighbors reading this? And certainly I was a little, antsy about my male friends reading this. And so, but that's what the story called for, because I wanted to do a play on the Ghost of Mrs. Muir, but a sexy version.
Yeah.
It's about a woman who's truly haunted by something she's done. So she goes and she rents this house that happens to be haunted by a ghost. So the woman is really haunted by two things. She's haunted by guilt and shame, and she's haunted by maybe this entity that lives in the house. And they start to really represent each other, these different versions of hauntings. But in the meantime, there's also a murder mystery involved in the story. So it was fun to combine an erotic love story, a ghost story, and a murder mystery in the same book.
Now, I know we got off topic a little bit because I know we do want to talk about Listen to Me, but no. But when you talk about kind of writing something that you don't want your friends to be embarrassed by, or your mother to read, I wrote a comedy, and in the comedy, it's really it's about this guy who's kind of down and out, and he has this big experience, this life-changing experience in Hawaii, and as part of that, he begins an affair with somebody, and there's a very graphic love scene in that, meant to be funny, but it's graphic, and editor was fine with it, everyone was fine with it, publishes, time to do the audiobook. Now, I had somebody in mind to do the audiobook. I couldn't do it. I don't have the patience for it. But I had this one guy, this voiceover artist I know. I'm like, Mike, you have to do this book. And he agreed to do it. He read the first chapter and he's like, done, sold, this good story, like where it's going. Then he gets to that one scene in the middle of the book and he calls me. He's like, you need to rewrite that because I can't get through this scene. and he's like, he just wouldn't do it. And instead of, me finding other talent, I decided to rewrite it and tone it down a little bit because it was, let's put it this way, he had a point. At a point, but
this is a whole interesting topic for another podcast about what is it about audiences are willing to read some of the most gruesome murder scenes. But when it comes to something that's very natural, something that has brought us all on this earth because we wouldn't be born without it, they can't stand to read it. We don't want to think about our parents doing it. We don't want to think about our children doing it. And yet it's a fundamental fact of being a biological creature. I mean, people have to reproduce.
Right. Well, I think it's also like Americans, we are uptight when it comes to this. I mean, and my wife and I have kind of different points of view. I'm let's say a little bit less uptight than she is. She's a tad more inhibited. But we have 3 kids. We have triplets. They just turned 20 last weekend. I'm very sort of like, they're in college. I'm sure they're doing things that we were doing at that age. So I'm a little bit more open about those conversations, but it's like, hey, my wife is like, they can't know what we're doing. I'm like, honey, they know how they got here. I'm like, isn't it better for them to know that, their parents are in a decent place relationship wise?
I know. But yeah, I think a lot of it is American, has to do with Americans, because if you were to talk to a Dutchman, they wouldn't care.
Or a Frenchman, forget about it.
Yes.
Forget about it. All right. So back to Jane Rizzoli and Maura Isles. So the new book is coming out. I know it's coming out July 5th. And you're focusing on sort of Jane's mom in this one. Did you learn anything new about her mom as you were kind of writing her in this one?
Yeah, I did, because, well, the basic story is that while Jane is investigating the murder of a hospital nurse, her mom is busy investigating something in her own neighborhood. And the suburbs seem boring to us, but through the eyes of Angela Rizzoli, the suburb is eternally fascinating because she likes to watch her neighbors. She's kind of like the neighborhood watch lady, and she knows when things are wrong and things are not, looking a little suspicious. And when one of the neighborhood girls disappears, Angela decides that somebody needs to look into this. So that launches her onto this whole story about what is going on in your neighborhood. When you look out your window, are the people you see through their windows actually who they say they are? And so that was the fun about it. We're all in a sense busybodies. We all like to know what's going on in our surroundings. Jane's mom takes it a step too far. She really starts to become an investigator. But what I learned about her is how courageous she is. She's a very, very brave woman. If she sees somebody being threatened, she runs in to try and help them. She's a little bit like her daughter that way. Her daughter got her moxie from mom. And it's fun to see Angela get into trouble and then get herself out of trouble again.
Yeah, I'm just curious with the character development there, because I mean, obviously you mentioned she's been in all the books. So maybe not a primary character, but certainly, it's a supporting character, always there. But I'm always curious how authors develop characters and continually develop characters, because if characters are always the same, then they get a little boring, right? So I love the fact that you're focusing on the mom, or that she's a bigger area of focus in this one.
Well, she's had a lot of changes in her life through the books. I mean, she started off happily married, and then her husband left her, and then she has an affair with a retired police officer, a retired detective. So, and this is a good, strict Catholic woman.
Yeah.
And here she is having an affair outside of marriage. And so she has evolved to become maybe more open-minded, more aware that people have foibles, that humans are not perfect, and that she is not perfect herself. So I like the direction that she's taking, and that she's just more tolerant of differences with other people. And she's also tolerant of the fact that people make mistakes.
Yeah. Interesting you say how she's kind of like the neighborhood watch, and are the people who are walking by your window really who they say they are. A few weeks ago, we had a house guest visiting us, and my wife and I, we have this habit, since we're empty nesters, we're looking for entertainment wherever we can find it. So we have this big, window in where our kitchen table is, and we can look out to the street, and we just observe people walking by. And one day I just was mentioning, I said to my wife's name is Nicole. I say, Nicole, I've never seen this couple before. Who do you think they are? They were just this new couple in the neighborhood walking their dog. And our friend Christina is like, you guys need to get a life. You are sitting there in front of your window, looking outside. She's like, go out and enjoy the world. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is pure entertainment for us. Kind of creating stories about these people who are walking by that we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating to me.
Well, and that's, oh, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing off in the distance, but I'm hoping my husband will pick that up. But no, that's true, because the story talks about how Angela looks in the windows at night, and she considers each window kind of like a mini television set. She's looking into different shows that are happening down her street. Over there is of the two couples is the couple that isn't talking to each other. Over here is the missing girl's family. I mean, there's so many things that go on in our lives that we have access to just by looking through windows.
Yeah, it's amazing. And now, is Angela on social media? Does she stalk people on Facebook?
No, she does not. To me that I didn't. In fact, I don't remember that she even mentions being on social media in this particular show, in this particular book. But what she does do is she pushes herself into these situations that really she gets into a dangerous situation where Jane may have to come and rescue her.
Yeah. So I'm excited for this book. I'm excited to see Jane and Maura once again. But I'm curious on a bigger picture, like where do your stories come from? Where do you suppose your stories come from? Because they're so good. They are so good. And I'm thinking even like going back to Bloodstream and Harvest. I mean, some of the earlier ones, the medical thrillers, right? I love them. But like, where do they come from? How do you hatch them?
They come from wherever I can find them. A lot of times it comes from reading a lot of true crime or reading the newspaper. You read a newspaper and you see some kind of odd story and you don't know how to explain it. Well, that becomes a book. I find that a lot of the stories that I come up with are things that get hatched while I'm traveling. I know a secret came partly because I was in Italy and looking at religious art and the symbolism, understanding the symbolism of religious art, and thinking, whoa, that's an interesting way to set up a crime scene, is that everything that happens is from the life of a saint in this death scene. And then I listened to conversations as well, just hearing a story about children who were vanishing from the streets of Moscow and maybe being sent off to the Middle East as organ donors. That became the book Harvest. Mm-hmm. And then finally, as you say, you get stuff from your own life. And I was having trouble with my older son, who was 14 years old at the time. And I thought, boy, teenagers are difficult. What if they're dangerous? And that become the book Bloodstream, because, you just sort of expand little tiny things that you hear, little tiny things that you see onto a bigger canvas.
Well, to me, it speaks to curiosity and like the willingness or the openness. Just follow your curiosity to an interesting place. I mean, how an everyday encounter can become, a best-selling novel. I mean, to me, that's where I think people who are successful with writing, differ from those who may not be. And maybe that's not fair, but just being the willingness to follow that curiosity to an interesting place, to me, is almost like a superpower.
Well, it goes far beyond writing. I think people who are curious tend to be successful in every field. Success often has to do with putting together something completely new, something that no one's thought of before. And curiosity is where that leads, is where you get that from, because you're curious about a number of different topics, and you suddenly find out that fact A over here and fact B over here, which have nothing to do with each other, suddenly you put them together and you've got something brand new. I mean, I call it my formula, which is 1 + 2 is equal to 6. It's more than, the combination is more than the sum of these two different things.
Right. Very, very Gestalt. Very Gestalt thinking. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, if I remember my psychology correctly.
Right. And curiosity is just so important to being a writer.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just ask you a couple of fun questions here as we wrap up. And these are all meant to sort of help understand who you are as a person, what some of your interests are. So I'm curious to start off with, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
Oh, well, I grew up in the era of, it's embarrassing to say, Gilligans Island and Get Smart and all the old sitcoms. I love those old sitcoms.
I love Gilligan's Island. I mean, and my dad grew up with Bob Denver. He, I almost said John Denver. No, but Bob Denver in New Rochelle, New York. He was one of the neighborhood kids before he made it big. But I just remember watching that show and thinking to myself, if the professor can make a radio out of coconuts, how can they not build a boat to get off the island?
Yeah, I know. Those old sitcoms are ridiculous. They really are when you think about how realistic is this. But what they did, like magic, was put together a diverse group of people in a locked house, is what they essentially did. They can't get away. They're stuck with each other. They each have a different talent, and that's they could have turned that into The Mousetrap. They could have turned that into one of them was getting killed one by one, but instead they turned it into a comedy that I still think back fondly of, and I'm now the Gilligan's Island theme is going through my head. Thank you.
Well, just sit right back and you'll hear a tale. So we got Gilligan's Island. The other thing that I thought was weird about Gilligan's Island, that's not to go off on this tangent, but there were always these random cannibals that would show up once or twice a season. And where do they go otherwise? I mean, their primary food source is in the same spot in every episode, yet they just kind of come and go as they please.
They go in and out of the studio canteen. That's right.
That's right. How about let's talk music? If we were to look at your any of your musical streaming services that you may or may not use, I don't want to presume, but what artists would we find on there that might be overrepresented? Who do you like to listen to?
John Williams. It has to do with movies and the power of music to tell stories. So I love the music that goes on with theatrical films. So somebody like John Williams who does does the Star Wars theme. I mean, you hear that and you remember what it was like to sit in the theater and have that wonderful thrill of watching that movie for the first time.
Yeah.
Or the themes, the themes that have to do with a lot of, especially I love themes that have to do with romance, like The English Patient, that whoever wrote the soundtrack to that, just Last of the Mohicans. Those are fantastic compositions that we think, well, that's off the stage. We don't really consider those composers, but they are, and they're expert at really manipulating how we feel.
Yeah. The right score can make or break a movie.
Yeah.
It really can. I had a music teacher, my freshman year in high school. Her name is Marie Corso. big into classical music, but she would always play it for us and say, hey, listen to this when you are studying, listen to this, and then listen to it. And then she would play it for us when we would have to take a test. And it was just interesting how it like activated like different parts of the brain where like memories are stored, and it would help. I mean, maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but to me it helped.
Yeah.
All right, number 3, how do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write, and your goal is to write something in a writing session? How do you feel when you look at the blank page?
That I need to cut this out and retire. That's it. I've had enough. But I deal with that every day. And every day I'm sitting there looking at this page that I think is really horrible and that I've done a terrible job. And I keep thinking, okay, 31 books is enough. I can walk away now. And it is. It's a temptation to say I give up. But the story keeps calling you back. That's it. Yeah. It's really the characters to say, hey, I want to finish up here because I want to have a happy ending. So you go back to fulfill the fantasies of your characters.
Right. Well, they become part of your soul at some point, I would imagine. I mean, these characters, it's almost a spirit. I think being a writer is almost a spiritual calling of sorts, because you're not just doing it for you. You are doing it for your readers too. I mean, I'm sure you do. Part of it is doing it for you, but
yeah, it's really funny. I think, as you said, there is a spiritual aspect to it, but it's that we're channeling these people that we have made up. They become real to us, and we care about them, and we think, well, what are they going to do next? So, every character that I really care about has a great deal that has to do with me. So I want to give them a satisfying ending.
Yeah. What's a lesson about writing or publishing that you feel like you learned the hard way?
Oh, to trust your process, no matter how ridiculous it is. So I had a terrible time with second book syndrome. I wrote my first book, got it published, did well. And then I took 2 or 2.5 years to write my second book because I kept getting stuck. I kept thinking, I need to have this outline before I can finish writing the book. I need to know where the book is going. And so I really had a terrible time. And then I realized that my process is pretty much seat of the pants, that you just have to trust yourself. You just say, well, okay, I've written myself off this cliff, but I know I can rescue myself. And once you've learned to have faith in your process, once you learn that you will be able to figure out all the problems in the story, you can continue. So I think that was really what I learned probably within the first 5 books, is that every book is hard, just get past it.
Mm-hmm. I guess somewhat of a similar question would be, what's some advice you would give to an aspiring author, someone who comes up to you and says, Tess, I want to do what you do? What would you tell that person?
Well, this is for me personally. Don't stop to edit. Just keep on writing and trust that your first draft is probably going to be horrible. That's okay. Remember, nobody has to see that first draft. So I would say right to the end, to beginning, middle, and end. And then when you've finished it, you can go back and fix stuff.
Okay. And last but not least, if you could write a letter to the younger Tess Gerritsen, right, to the younger girl who had just written the biography of her cat, what are some of the things that you would tell her? What advice would you give your younger self?
Go to Mexico. No, actually, that's a serious thing. Because I think that I would go back. I would tell myself, be more adventurous. Do the things that were tempting to you, but you backed away because you thought, that's a little scary. Do those things. What's an example of something of where you could have been more adventurous and decided not to be? Well, okay, I'm going to refer to that Mexico quote again because it's actually true. I was an anthropology student, and my professor had said, "Hey, we're going on a dig to Mexico this summer. Would you like to come?" I should have gone. And been on an archaeological dig for the summer. Instead, I was afraid to leave my boyfriend because I thought, oh, he's going to lose interest in me. So I should have gone to Mexico because that boyfriend is long gone. Well, I mean, if you went to the dig in Mexico, you could have listened to John Williams do the Indiana Jones score. I know. Isn't that something? I could have come home knowing a lot more about archaeology. Right. And that score could replace the Gilligans Island theme song that you've had in your head since we've been talking. My earworm now. Yeah.
Well, the book is Listen to Me. The author is Tess Gerritsen. It'll be available on July 5th. Tess, where can people go if they wanted to learn more about you? Do you have a website? Do you have any social media handles you wanted to share?
Yeah, I have a website, tessgerritsen.com, and I am on Twitter at Tess Gerritsen, and I'm also on Facebook as well.
Very good. Well, Tess, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.